started. I'll hand it over to you, Kathleen and Zoe.
Okay.
Oh, so to go 2 hours backwards, just to then go up, yeah. And the point was...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's fourth space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, which is the first event in SynBio Expressions, an event series on democratizing science through conversations. Today's event is Bionarratives, Creative Perspectives in Science. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, we are live from FourSpace, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And here at FourSpace, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so we welcome any comments or questions there with a raised hand or via the chat. Those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, just let us know. Just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone over to you. With that, it's my pleasure to pass the microphone over to the co-organizers and creative minds behind this week's events, Kathleen Hahn, Zoe Katz. So great to have you. Over to you.
Thank you, though. We'd like to start out with talking a lot about where we are situated today. We gather today in Tiohtià:ke, the ancestral and unceded lands under the custody of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. When we discuss the institution of science, it is especially important to consider the difficult history of science and indigenous knowledge systems and how it has shaped science methods. Science has, for a long time, attempted to distance itself from the context around it as to avoid bias, and in doing so has neglected to address anti-indigenous sentiments that have historically shaped its funding, its findings, and its use. More recently, initiatives featuring collaborations between scientists and autochthonous groups have resulted in scientific projects that address real-world needs and incorporate indigenous and community knowledge. The work is long. We encourage you to reflect on how colonial roots have shaped science and the future avenues ahead. A commitment to democratization cannot be complete without a commitment to decolonization. While science and technology can bring exciting developments in health, food, and the understanding of our natural and physical world, these systems can also be used for extreme destruction. Science, imperialism, and militarism have been entangled at the technological level, but also at an ideological level which seeks to establish science as an apolitical activity. Democratizing science entails acknowledging the politics of science and for scientists to step into a peacemaking role. We invite our audience to think of the ways science and technology have played in a role in the current crises around the world, including in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ukraine, and Palestine. We urge Concordia to completely divest and cut ties with weapon manufacturers such as Lockheed Martin. Previously, Concordia successfully divested from fossil fuels, and this precedent can lay a successful path to similar avenues. We hope you keep these ideas close to you as we explore the different facets of SynBio democratization, and that you carry them with you into your work beyond this space.
This symposium could not have happened without the support of the Graduate Student Association, the Center of Synthetic Biology, and the Synthetic Bio Apps program. Orlean Weinberg has been an invaluable mentor who has been there from the conceptualization of this project to the execution, and we can't thank her enough. We'd also like to extend our thanks to the folks at FourSpace, Bertie, Doug, Jax, and Isa, who have been amazing at helping us brainstorm what a good science event can look like, and who are responsible for all of the technical details that act like the phosphate backbone to our defense DNA. Finally, we'd like to thank Quebec Public Interest Research Group, the Biology Graduate Association, the iGEM team, Christina Sanza, Dan Gershkin, Anya Chutnikov, and others who have shaped the very delicate porous membrane of our events and have helped them bring to life. So welcome everyone to the Bionarratives panel, Creative Perspectives in Science. Before we dive into the panel, I just wanted to let everyone know that there will be a Q&A at the last 20 minutes or so of our time. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Kathleen, and I'll be the panel host for this discussion. I'm a synthetic biology master's student at Concordia in the Synthetic Biology Apps program. And in my pastime, I love to draw. I love to paint using watercolor and gouache. And something that I've always wondered is, what would my research project look like if I painted it? And this curiosity of mine made me realize how challenging it can be to translate complex science concepts into a form that non-scientists can easily understand. So yeah, I'm very personally interested in the opportunities that link science and art together, which is why I'm really excited to have a conversation with my three panelists that are joining me today on the importance of having creative perspectives in translational science. I'm just going to move to the... Sorry. Okay. Okay, so today joining me in person, we have Dr. Matteo Farinella, who has a PhD in neuroscience from the University College London in 2013. Since then, he's been combining his scientific expertise with a lifelong passion of drawing to make science more clear and accessible to the general public. He has published science comics both for adults and children, and he currently works as a scientific multimedia producer at the Columbia University Zuckerman Institute. We also have Danielle Kunkel today, joining us in person, who is an interdisciplinary artist and designer who believes in using her background in art and design in ways which visualize and simplify complicated topics like synthetic biology, climate change, and biodiversity loss. After graduating from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2022, she worked at Ginkgo Bioworks, a synthetic biology company, for 2 years as a brand and visual designer, and is currently freelancing as a graphic designer for synthetic biology companies. And finally joining us through Zoom, we have Dr. Jennifer Willet. Dr. Jennifer Willet is an artist, the Canada Research Chair in Art, Science, and Ecology, a professor in the School of Creative Arts at the University of Windsor, and a director of the Incubator Art Lab founded in 2009. Jennifer is a leader in the Canadian art science community and works internationally as an artist and curator in the field. And in 2018, Willet opened a state-of-the-art bioart laboratory, and in 2020, a storefront bioart studio and community engagement center in Windsor. So to kick things off, I'd love to know how each of you got into the world of communicating science through art. What inspired you to dive into this unique field? Anyone can start.
You guys start, I'll go last.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having us. This is great, this event. So a bit more about my background. As you mentioned, I have a background in science. I studied cellular molecular biology and then neuroscience. But I personally, I always loved drawing. Like, now people always ask me, when did you start drawing? And my answer is like, when did you all stop? Because I feel like we all draw as children. Like, it's one of the first way we express ourselves. Yeah. And I always loved drawing. I also grew up reading comics. So over the years, I started drawing, writing my own comics. I never really stopped. But for many years, throughout my science studies, I never really saw a way to combine the two. So I didn't even know about sci art or science communication. So I kept them very separately. That was all the way up until the end of my PhD, when I started working on this comic, my first comic, neurocomic, with my collaborator, Hannah Ross, who's a scientist like me, but unlike me, she had this background in science communication. So she was the first one to make me realize that this thing I've been doing, art and drawing, had the potential to reach many more people than are published scientific papers. So that's how I really kind of started combining the two. it took me a long time to figure it out. That's the answer.
For me, I don't have a background in science. I started off as an artist and I got my degree in art. And at my college, MICA, they offered some classes in biofabrication, and that's what introduced me into this world. So I guess actually, let me step back a little bit, but in the work that I make personally, like in my fine arts world, I always make things that have a focus on enlightening about environmental issues, such as climate change or biodiversity loss. And I always like to have like next steps of like, what can you do? Like, what can you learn and what can you do with it? And then, so learning about, and so that's just my thing as an artist is I feel like I want to use art as a way to make a difference. And synthetic biology, when I got into those classes, and collaborating with these tiny, tiny organisms that you can't really see, it just like furthered my appreciation for biology and the power that nature has. And from there, I didn't want to leave that field. Like, I feel like it was just like a beautiful way of bringing together like nature and sustainability and art. And so after I graduated, I joined Ginkgo Bioworks as I was on the marketing team as a graphic designer and brand designer. But yeah, that's how I got into it, and I'm loving it. Yeah.
My background is all in the fine arts. My undergraduate degree and my master's are in fine arts. My PhD is in the interdisciplinary humanities program at Concordia. So it's unfortunate I can't be there in person because this is my alma mater and I'm alumni. I would like to really, first of all, thank Zoe and Kathleen for hosting me. It's delightful to be here. So in my own practice as a young artist, I was very interested in medicine and the body as it's represented in art. And so during my undergraduate degree, I was doing a lot of artwork around those themes and topics. And I talked my way into the human anatomy lab at the University of Calgary. And my boyfriend and I at the time would go down there a couple of days a week and draw the cadavers. And it really changed me. It changed me to be in the presence of dead human bodies and to sort of learn a lot about that. It also changed me to be in the presence of this other system of knowledge, medicine, right? And to see how the hierarchies are formed and how entry-level positions are trained and what knowledge is around there. It also, the thing that I really learned at that moment is how, as an artist, we can talk our way into places where we don't belong. Before, the idea of just like some random person talking their way into a human anatomy lab is about a 0% chance of success. But because I said I was a student and I was an artist and there was something I had to do there, some sort of activity, I was able to sort of access this space that is highly private and segregated. So after that, I started working with medicine and science in my art more, but again, representationally. And but eventually I met Oran Katz and Yonat Zur at a big festival in Germany, and they run Symbiotica, which is the first and one of the most important art and science research centers in the world. And they invited me to come do a residency there, and I did a residency in 2004 and 2006. And that's the first time as an artist I was really in labs, operating equipment, conducting research, learning new protocols. And during that time, I learned a number of things. I really learned that what I do as an artist in the realm of representation is very different than doing things for real in the lab. And that was sort of a catastrophic moment. I learned a lot about the sort of interactions that you might have with other life forms in the lab. And then the other thing I learned in that moment is that as an artist, I had real skills that scientists wanted. All the scientists had me doing their microscopy for them because I'm really good with cameras and I know how to make really compelling images. And I found that even though the work there was really like driven by sort of like objective methodologies, that making the arguments around that work was something that I could really help with because of my skills and my creative eye and my storytelling.
It's awesome. So some of you obviously started in a background of science or art. I'm interested in learning like how can you walk us through like your creative process when you have to work with scientists or artists vice versa on a project? Like, how does that look like?
All right, I was trying to mix it up, but so yeah, I work, again, as you mentioned, I work as essentially the in-house illustrator, designer for Columbia Deckman Institute, so I work directly with the scientists. So every project is different, of course. That's actually why I love this job. But usually, yeah, it starts with the scientists. So they have some new research they want to tell the world about, or they have some other project that needs some kind of visual. And so they reach out to us. And again, I should make clear, I work as part of a team, so I'm not alone. There's a whole communication team. There's also a science writer who writes press releases. There's a video person. So yeah, once they reach out to us, usually our first question, explicit or implicit, is like, who's the audience? That's the first thing I learned when starting to work in science communication. Because of course, there are very different needs. If it's a figure for a scientist, for other scientists, like a diagram, then of course, the science should lead. And I usually ask the scientist to do a sketch. And it's interesting to see how many scientists actually do sketch, and like even if they don't think of it as art, like they do use art in their work. So yeah, I asked it to sketch a diagram or send me some previous figure that they want to improve on, and then I do a pass, and then yeah, it usually involves a lot of back and forth, because in that case we are really trying to explain something in detail. The process is very different, of course, if it's something more for the general public. So if it's like a journal cover even, or an illustration or an animation for our website, our press releases, then I actually usually prefer to start myself, like without I don't want to say preconception, but like that's the advantage of me having a background in science. I can read their papers. I can try to understand what are they trying to say? What is the main discovery here? And I like to do a first 1 or 2 sketches just to have something concrete to discuss. And then I meet with them and they give me feedback, of course. And they, of course, they always have the final word, like it's their work. So I want them to be happy. But yeah, the amount of input I take and the amount of revisions it takes varies a lot. And yeah, I guess that summarizes it. I mean, of course, it's completely different for, yeah, if it's an animation or a comic, like a longer project. But yeah, usually there's a few rounds of revisions, and they give the final approval. Because again, I want to make clear now that I'm sitting here with real artists. Like, I don't really think of myself as an artist. Like, I'm really an illustrator, which I think is slightly different. Like I'm working for the scientist. I'm not trying to of course I bring my own sensibility and my own taste, but I see it more as like almost like a craft. Like we need to communicate something and we have to figure out together what's the best way to do it visually. I don't know if it makes sense.
I want to start off by saying I definitely view you as an artist. I think you're really talented. But for myself, for my work process, I guess I want to first preface that I view myself having 2 areas of work. One is personal, and then one is job stuff. So for my personal, that normally looks like fine art, and then I use graphic design to support what cannot be said through the fine art alone, just to help get the message across that I'd like to inform about. So in personal works, I'll usually, my process is really just looking into everything I possibly can, doing a ton of research, trying to read and understand any reports or data, and figuring out from there how I want to bring it to life. Whereas the other side of my work, where it's more job-related work, that's more working with synthetic biology companies. They usually come to me with something that they would like designed. So then that process looks a little bit different because I already have like an end goal to get to, but then it's my point of then trying to bring that to life and see how does that look. But regardless, that one also usually does come with some research since I don't have like all the science background. So I'll try to educate myself like, okay, like what is this and how can we like make it look as best as possible? And then for both versions of my like personal and job side, it's always like a lot of just research and gathering and then sketching, iterating, talking to people, getting feedback, and then eventually getting to a point that feels final.
Nice.
I also have a couple of forms of outputs that operate a little bit differently. First and foremost, I'm a bioartist, so I am an artist who works hands-on with biotech protocols, and I have living organisms in my final artworks. So I come from a fine arts background, and so a lot of the work that I make is very makerly and comes from that tradition, but I'm also spending a lot of time in the lab and I'm like growing things and I'm not doing a great job, or I drop them on the floor. And so there's a lot of like back and forth. Like our two previous speakers, I think that when you're working between genres or in a field where things didn't really exist before, you sort of live these double or triple lives, right? So my creative process on the artworks is usually about a 7-year span from the beginning to the end. The beginning is just like flashes and memories or ideas. It's usually not very linguistic, it's very visual. Then slowly I'll start tinkering with things, and I have a lab group, so I have a staff of students and I have staff and students who work for me. So sometimes in the lab or in the studio, I'll be like, okay, I need you to try making this, try growing that, think about this, let's meet every week. Some of it is very myself tinkering with things at home. And then slowly I come up with prototypes. My work is very iterative. It's never the final version. I'm always thinking of something more. A good example would be this piece behind me right now. This is the first wall collage that I made for a piece called When Microbes Dream. And Microbes Dream now is this huge installation. It can be like 80 feet long, where we have all of the organisms that we share our labs and our planets with. But incorporated into that are these snow globes attached to the walls that also have living microorganisms in them. And the idea is that the viewer, the human, is one of the microorganisms in this space. And through that sort of shift of scale, we can think about maybe what their experience of being in the lab is. So that's one track. That's my research track, my art track. The other thing that's gone on over the years is that as I grew and became a research lab and I developed a couple of spaces, I've also now have become like sort of like a built environment designer, we could say. And so a lot of my creative art practice has gone into building scientific facilities that are also creative scientific facilities. So I have two spaces. One is a BSL level 2 bioart lab that has a glass wall and theatrical and lighting and sound. And so it's a performing multimedia theater lab where we can clone DNA and sing opera in the same place. And this lab can project to virtual or real audiences. And so that seems like a managerial or a technological innovation, but I have to be honest with you, it's also really an art innovation. It's like thinking about what a lab could look like. My lab has a chandelier in it, for example. My lab looks more like a kitchen than a lab. The second space is the space I'm in here, and this is my storefront studio space that is also a community engagement hub. And it's like a creative art makerly space. It has, if you have a look over here, this is our greenhouse lab that's been certified for BSL level 1 work for workshops. And then you can see there's Dom over there. Give everyone a wave, Dom. And then you can see we're working on projects right now. So again, part of my creative practice is, oh, and it has really great chandeliers, of course. Part of my creative practice is thinking through like, who's allowed in labs? What do they look like? What type of work can happen there? And what type of spaces can we develop around these practices?
Awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. I guess like the main theme here is like a lot of back and forth between, you know, your client and stuff. So maybe like, can you guys speak about like at what point do you have to kind of like give up on the art or give up on the science in order to portray what you need, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and something is already emerging, and like I always find in this kind of events, I think we start to see like there are many different kinds of things that like sci art or can many forms that it can take. And just to clarify, when I was saying I'm not an artist, like I mean I guess I am. Like I do have personal projects. I didn't talk about that, but in my role, like as I said, the scientists always have the final word. But that's only one very specific use of art. It's a very functional use of art. And maybe because I have this background in science, that's also like the first approach I came to mind. Like I'm going to use art to explain my science. And that's unfortunately like how many scientists I think still see art. But art can do many things. Like can do also like maybe can also challenge science, which, as we discussed already, like there's many problems. So like I don't think the scientist should always have the final word. The artist should take their own liberties and maybe even challenge the scientist. Again, as long as it comes from this spirit of like research and collaboration. Just want to clarify that. So when you're asking, basically what's the balance when I have to give up on the art in a way for the sake of the science? And that happens quite a lot in my role because, of course, as I said, I'm not trying to make a piece for myself. I mean, of course, I want to do something I'm proud of, and like I would be able to, like I'm happy to defend. But sometimes, like okay, I guess the challenge for me is always the scientists always want to add more and more information, and instead, the first thing I learned is that I need to simplify, and so that's usually the tension. And since I work for them, sometimes they do try to squeeze a bit too much detail in there. And of course, I try to make it always look like nice and clean and engaging. But the science has to be correct in the end. So like if something doesn't look right to them, I'm not gonna take an artist stand and say no, like I want to look like that. So but also the illustration I do are not usually that detailed. I'm not trying to do like realistic 3D reconstruction of proteins or brains. So I do have usually some room for creativity. Like as long as the brain looks more or less correct, or the neuron looks like a neuron, they don't like. I'm free to take some creativity, but I do have to compromise quite a lot.
I think what you said about like getting really technical about the graphics, it's like something that resonates with me, because even for myself, like making figures, like I'm just making figures all the time to different audiences to portray like what I'm researching, and it's like so easy for me to just like keep zooming into like, okay, like I'm gonna, I don't know, like draw the mitochondria of this cell, but it's like, is that really necessary? Like not really, so.
Yeah, and again, I think this is in part one of the roles that artists, well, I see part as our job. Like we have to educate scientists about what art can do and what's the goal here. The goal is not always to summarize an entire paper or your entire research. Like for people that want to do that, they can read the paper. Art or an illustration, whatever it is, in my mind, it's more of like a portal. Like it's something that you give people to like get a glimpse of what the research is about, get them excited about it, and then say, look, if you want to learn more, there's usually something more. Like there's a press release or a paper or an interview to read. So I always try to make clear to them, like I'm not trying to like replicate your paper in visual format. I'm trying to do something that goes with your paper or accompanies your paper. And that's the challenge.
I feel like you said that really well. So for me, I think it's not necessarily giving up science, but I look at it more of like just simplifying it, realizing that we all like can only take in so much information, and sometimes the way that the design or the art looks requires it to be simplified. So one of the things that comes to mind for me is I had to make like 150 icons that displayed different science topics. So those can be anything from cells to microorganisms to processes or tools. And those are all really, really complicated. Like you said, like detailing a little mitochondria in the entire cell along with everything else in that cell. As an icon, the job of an icon is to be as simple and bold as possible, that you can see it from very small scales or large scales and still know what it is. So in instances like that, I would simplify it where it's still recognizable that you can know it's a cell, but it's not going to be like accurate with every detail and but another thing, like when you're mentioning papers and stuff, so on my personal side of art, my big child project is called Bye Bye Birdies, and this project is I view it as an immersive graph installation. So basically, I take data from this paper posted from the Audubon Survival by Degree report, and that report talks about how bird populations, like how threatened they will be in the face of climate change. And it gets really, really detailed down to location of like what location birds will be threatened and like what like summer or winter, because obviously birds migrate, so those are like that also shows like in the summer or winter they might be threatened or not threatened. So when depicting that data, like I realized like that's like it gets like really confusing, and the way for me to depict it, I chose like the worst one, because even if a bird might be fine and safe in the summer, like, but the winter time they lose their land because of deforestation, they might not exist altogether then. So I would then portray it in like a more simplified or summarized thing, and then would link to the papers so that if people were more interested in reading about it, then they can do that.
I'm a little less tied to facts and accurately portraying science than the other two panelists. Coming from a very fine arts perspective, I'm interested in the cultural implications of science, the social and political tensions in science. I can be engaged in a critique of science. Specifically, you know, thinking back to the culture wars and the introduction we had today about the colonial history of science, a lot of that is part of my work. But I will also say in the last decade or so, with the climate crisis and like science denial, I've now become like an advocate also, like how we can hold these two truths to be true, that maybe also science is the way forward and something that we really need to listen to. So I have to say, in art, there is like storytelling, imagination, fibbing, lying sometimes. So I'm not always tied exactly to the truth. Although I have to say I'm highly motivated by science and knowledge and reading papers and meeting with scientists and collaborating. So quite often the science in my work is very accurate. I will say there's one part that I'm really tied to that controls me, and that is maybe not the science, but the organisms themselves. And what I've learned over the years is that I can't make organisms do what I want them to do. They're going to do what they want to do. And so they're like my collaborators, and but they bring their own attributes and skills and expressive activities to the collaboration. So often when I start a project or I start working with a new organism, I ask myself, like, what are you good at? What do you do? What do you not like? What do you, what are the sort of motivating factors for this organism? And through learning that, it teaches me what I can and cannot ask them to do and how we together can collaborate to make an artwork.
I love that answer. Maybe you guys can share like what was a example of like a creative approach that you had that significantly like enhanced the communication impact of whatever you had to make. Yeah, sorry. This is like because we were talking about, you know, giving up a little bit of the science to the art. So like maybe in a scenario where you took the position of, you know, prioritizing the art over the science, maybe that, you know, helped
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it answered the question, but I guess to add the conversation we are having, like I just this summer, I had this interesting experience. I was part of this workshop about colors and visual strategies in cellular molecular biology. So this was really brought together scientists, cellular molecular biologists, people developing the softwares to visualize proteins and molecules, and then artists and designers and even like historians. And yeah, the first kind of clash right away was that the scientists were expecting to come out of it with like just like a list of recommendations. Like this is like, these are all the things we want to represent, and we should decide together, these are the colors and they're going to work for everybody in every situation. And all the more humanities people, including me, I always side with the humanities now. Like, this is impossible. Like, the first question is like, who do you want? Like, who is this for? Like, you're gonna have different solutions for different audiences. And yeah, the scientists were really like kind of like shocked by this idea, like that they always look for this like one unified solution. And the fact that visualizations can be dependent on context and culture, like this was kind of a new idea for many of them. So, I mean, we haven't quite figured out a solution yet, so I don't know if it's a success story, but it was an example of where like we had these conversations and we had to like explain the scientists that, yeah, what they were trying to do was kind of impossible. And yeah, we mentioned the culture wars, and for those who are not familiar, there's like these big debates of like art versus scientists, or I guess science versus humanities. And Sipi Snow wrote at this famous lecture about the two cultures and how science and art are separated. And there's something like I want to say about that. I find very often that, I don't know, for some reason, like it's on the artist. Like we expect the artist to learn everything about science before making any science art. Especially, I guess, I'm always talking about the scientists. Like, there's the expectation on the artist to like do research, but I never see the same on the scientist. Like, most of us are not trained in art, and we kind of take it for granted. It's something anybody can do art, which I think is true to some degree, but also there is a lot to learn there, which I learned in the past 10 years. And scientists, I think, should also learn some of that. I think it could be useful, not just in communication, but everything they're doing.
Yeah.
So, sorry, maybe it's off topic, but...
No. That actually brings up, because Jennifer has a course that kind of touches exactly on what you are suggesting. So maybe before we jump into that, we can... Or now, if... Is that the,
Yeah. So
I
I totally agree with what you're saying. I get so many scientists who are like, I like to draw. Let me come and do your graduate level art course. And I'm like, no. Like, just like you, we're a discipline that has knowledge that has to be accrued over time, and histories and trajectories. So it's really important that the scientists understand that they are also dealing with specialists, right? I do host a class called BioArt, Contemporary Art in the Life Sciences. It's a third-year undergraduate course. And what I do is I open it to anyone across campus. And what I do is I get a whole bunch of very enthusiastic people who either know a bit about science or a bit about art, and they get to do hands-on biotech protocols towards the production of artwork. And the scientists, some of them have excellent art skills. Most of them, though, really bring the scientific knowledge to the class and engineering and those types of things, whereas the artists bring the art skills. And together, we all learn things, including myself, from the students. We also have at the University of Windsor a club called SMART, Science Meets Art, because a lot of scientists wanted to go into art before they went into sciences. And so they have a whole club that we also help facilitate events for, where science majors get training in all different types of disciplines like drama and music and poetry and art, because it does contribute to their well-being, but also to their science. And I think that's the last thing I'd like to mention, is that often when I work with scientists, they say to me, oh, at the end, like that was way more interesting than I thought it would be. I thought I was going to help you, but it turned out that you also helped me. And what that means is that even though I'm not a molecular biologist, I'm really good at asking in questions from a different perspective or challenging fundamental perceptions of someone's research project in a way that can lead to real applied innovation and creative thinking in the lab. So I think that the scientists do have a lot to gain from the arts.
They need a course like that at Concordia. Yeah. Well, Dana, did you have? Okay.
I feel like that was really
Yeah, that was good. How do you like measure the impact of your work? Like, do you ever get feedback like, oh, like this really helped, like someone understand something? Do you ever get, like, how do you know like if the art you're making at the end of the day, like, you know, you're getting feedback from the scientists' art, obviously, but then it's like anyone else?
I think it's actually kind of hard to measure. I think I don't know if I necessarily measure the impact of my work, just because I know that art is subjective, and everyone viewing my work, even if I'm spelling out every single thing that says what it is, people might not read that, or they might interpret it slightly differently, and like I think that's okay. Like I think really, I guess like the important measure is like as long as somebody's walking away from the piece of art with something, whether that's a feeling, whether that's a knowledge, whether that's motivation on an action that they could take, whatever it is, I feel like that's like a good way to measure it, is just knowing that everyone has something different to take away and view from it.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, and like I always struggle with it because yeah, side note, so yeah, after my PhD, I went freelance and I started working as an illustrator, but then I briefly actually returned to academia. I did this interdisciplinary postdoc in society and neuroscience, where that was kind of my goal. Like after I've been doing it for a few years, I really wanted to know, like, is what I'm doing actually effective? Like, does it work? How does it work? So I spent 3 years trying to figure out, I mean, I went in really like, again, with this very scientific mindset, like I'm gonna design studies, I'm gonna like compare text and visuals and see and prove with numbers that visuals are more effective at learning or engagement or whatever. And very quickly I learned that that's very hard to do. So I think I actually went through some of that process as a scientist to like kind of, I had to unlearn some of my assumptions, and like I had to, I realized everything is much more complicated than I thought. And because, yeah, again, there are different audiences, there are different kind of visuals, there are, there are different things you can measure. Like, do you want people to learn something about the science, or do you just want them to be more curious about the science? Which personally, I think is actually, with what I do, that's my hope. It's not necessarily like that they learn something new or they remember something better. It's more about lowering the barrier. So it's like for the people that maybe wouldn't read the scientific paper, or wouldn't even read the popular science book, but maybe a comic, they like, for the first time, get them thinking about science. So I think that's a very valuable thing, but how do you measure that? It's very hard to quantify. But in terms of feedback, something I really liked actually is like scientists that, specifically for this series I did for the Zuckerman Institute, which is, they're short comics, literally like 6-panel comic strips about how people got into science. So they're less about the science itself and more about the scientists. And I thought these were, again, the scientific content is very minimal. So I always thought of these as more for the general public. But it's some of the things I've done that the scientists love the most. And a lot of scientists, especially young scientists, like PhD students, grad students, they told me, oh, this is like, for the first time, my grandma or like, I don't know, my relatives understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that was very valuable to them. And I didn't even think that that was one of the potential outcomes. So yeah, that made me very happy.
I love that. I mean, that's honestly like the overall like goal of this entire event series is like, me and Zoe had the issue that, you know, our friends and family who have no science expertise, it's like they're not gonna understand, and it's like they just like ask like, what's your project? And it's like, whoa, that's a loaded question, because we can go into so many different like facets of that. But yeah, like just at least having like resources out there in order to spark people's curiosity and like, you know, kind of scratch their heads and be like, oh, like actually, what is synthetic biology? Like I actually don't really know like what that is. So
I really agree with Matteo and your comments. I think that sometimes science and science communicators are interested in these really discrete, direct communications of an idea, like listen to this information, do or do not take a vaccine. All of that happens in 2 weeks' time. Either it was successful or it failed, right? And I'm not interested in that. I mean, I think that's one aspect, and that has to happen. But what I have to offer, and what the arts maybe has to offer, is how do you create curiosity and exposure to science, even if people are critical of it? Wouldn't you rather people know more and come to their own conclusions instead of like completely blocking out science as a form of content? So one of the things that I do is I use strategies that they're not direct, they're whimsical. I create like parades and picnics and things where people don't know. Like I don't say, hey, do you want to come to my house and learn about algae? I say, come on, we're having a parade. And then the next thing they know, they're learning about algae and all of the different roles it plays in the Great Lakes ecology, for example. So people are more likely, if you break the sort of the uptightness of our sort of cultural rules about how we're going to be together and what type of afternoon we're going to have, I find they're more open to learning about science. Now, the one thing I will say is I have all sorts of experiential knowledge of how important it is to bring the arts and sciences together. But I've also learned over the years that society and science likes data. And even though I think it's absurd, a few years ago, we started creating like data collection after events, because we do a lot of workshops where people have to register. So we have their email addresses. We're able to get feedback on what their experience was outside of just casual chatting. And then the next thing that we did is I just authored a grant where we're now I'm working with some artists in science labs across Canada, and we're putting artists in science labs and scientists in artist labs. And then we've partnered with a social scientist group who's going to do qualitative and quantitative analysis of what are some of the outcomes for the scientists and for the artists of doing these exchanges between the two research groups. Because I do feel like our world really wants more data. They don't want to listen to us saying like, it'll be good, you'll learn something cool. So I'm trying to create, as the second half of my research chair, like a history of data around these arguments so that future generations can receive funding and support for this type of work.
that's amazing. Yeah. Danielle, did you have anything to add or no? Pardon?
No, I think I started off very.
Okay. Yeah, just going back to, I mean, even like within like graduate studies, I feel like there's kind of like a vibe between, you know, oh, I'm an ecology student, I'm a molecular biologist, and there's honestly like a divide within the students, and that it's just like sad how it like stems from like, you know, we're all just grad students and we're already like, we have this divide. So I don't even know where I was going with that, honestly.
I just want to, like, as I guess, as representing the scientists for a second, like, data is important. Like, we do want to, like, I would love to see, I want to see the results of the study. Like, I think there are ways to measure, but I think, again, to link the two conversations, like, I think it goes back to, yeah, also educating the scientists that it may not be just one clear, quantifiable outcome. Like, things are more complicated. And again, you may have different results for different people. So actually, yeah, just not to go too much in detail, but based on my research that I did during those 3 years, it seems that actually, I mean, I was specifically studying comics compared to text. So like, I was trying to have a control group, you know, that like shows that, like, that's what scientists like. You give people the text and you give people the same text in comic format. And it could be that for people with a high scientific background or just whatever, with some scientific curiosity already, scientific background, the text may work better, because in that case, like the comic seems like it's just dumbing it down or like simplifying too much. But for people with a less scientific background that may not be willing to read the article, then the comic works better. So it's not a clear cut like art is good for everybody, comics improve learning 100%. Like it's more nuanced than that. Yeah. And again, that takes some understanding from the scientists that, they need to decide what do they want to do, who do they want to reach. And I think that's important.
Yeah, very, very personal.
Really agree. I think what we want is like a chorus of voices and strategies involved, rather than just relying on one strategy over others.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess like coming off of that, like how do you think we can encourage more integration of like creative arts and like storytelling in scientific research education, like right now? Like obviously you've done like a PhD in neuroscience, so you've experienced how like there aren't that many resources when you're in that like academic research field in storytelling. So
I mean, again, just briefly, but I, as I said, it took me a long time. I went through a whole degree and master and PhD without, maybe I had like one course on the history of science, but
that's like the closest
thing. Like nobody told me about science communication and visualization and all these things like we are all expected to do as scientists these days, but we had zero training.
Yeah.
And I think, some basic art training would really be useful early on in scientific career, even if you don't want to, like, I'm not trying to turn every scientist to an artist. Like, even if you hate drawing, it's okay. I think there's still some learning that's to be done about the role of visuals and the different kind of visuals. So just basic education for scientists.
I think I can answer this from the opposite perspective, coming from an art college. Micah did I feel like they were beginning to introduce that more actually. Like having the opportunity to take classes in biofabrication was absolutely amazing, and I didn't know that existed. And it was one professor who was amazing, but and he taught everything, but he didn't have like a science background either. But like also like self-taught, so like everyone was kind of learning together. And I guess like what I'm kind of getting with that is like from the art perspective, it would be really cool for like more like maybe like science classes being like a thing to take, or having more like scientists like teach art, or like have more of like that science in the art. And then I'm also even thinking of at our college I think they had like an internship program where students were able to work with NASA, and that was a really good program because they got to like the scientists got to learn from the artists on how do we visualize the solar system, how do we visualize like the rockets that we're building. And it really is like that collaboration between scientists and artists and makers. It really is like two sides of the same coin, but we look at it as if it's different sides. So I think just in both spaces, just like integrating us more together and like collaborating more from like the beginning to the end, like I think would definitely come with like really great results.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with both of you. I think that we should be teaching introductory classes across disciplines to students in all different areas. I think that we've moved so far towards the cult of overspecialization, which is really, on the other hand, we also need like excellence at very, very tiny things, but we also need general knowledge for collaborations and backgrounds. One of the other things that I would say, because I've worked in institutional environments for a long time, I think that for me, a lot of it also has to do with the funding and the structures of institutional spaces. We have a very hierarchical model. It's very militaristic, and it's also very siloed. So funding is allocated to the sciences, funding is allocated to the arts. There are hierarchies of who gets more funding and who's more valuable to our society, right? And then if you want to do anything in between, it's always on someone's sweat equity. It's always on good measure, like you have one cool professor who puts in the extra effort, or you got to talk someone in the sciences into hosting your class. So from my perspective, I think that, and this would have to do with any form of interdisciplinarity, if we really want to foster more interdisciplinarity in post-secondary education and research, then we need to have a funding structure that also funds interdisciplinary stuff that doesn't fit into one of the silos. And I can say that also as a student of the Interdisciplinary Humanities program at Concordia. I remember all the professors were sort of like teaching the odd class or volunteering their time. And there wasn't really a structure, a financial structure and a staff structure and physical spaces to host interdisciplinary work. And so I don't know what the solution is to that, but I do see it as a massive barrier.
I think we have a question from the audience. You can just come up. Oh, never mind. There's a, okay.
Hello. Thanks for being here. I'm a student at Concordia. I started with a background in the arts in intermedia and cyber arts, which I just wanted to bring up now since it's kind of a response to what you were just talking about. It's more technology focused, not specifically biology, but I always found myself doing things that were sort of biology oriented. And now I'm in the cell and molecular biology department. So I just wanted to ask about using biology as a medium, because that is something, as you were just talking about, that isn't supported in conventional academia. But is that a new form that you think will start being more commonly seen in academia or more accepted? And secondly, I just really wanted to ask about your algae sign behind you, because I'm working with algae and I'm just curious what that is. Thank you.
Oh wait, Jennifer.
Yes. So the first thing I'd like to say is Concordia is a special case. Concordia, I used to work I did my PhD there, but I also taught in the Studio Arts department. And I was there during the inception of the Hexagram Institute, which is now the Milieu Institute, which was originally a collaboration between art and engineering and then computer science. And so one of the things I'm talking about, money, they got a grant for $20 million to start those collaborations. And so I want to be very clear and look at the legacy. Now it's like 25 years later, and this legacy exists. There's these whole programs and students like yourself, intergenerational students now, who are that type of knowledge is being produced. So I would really like to say that I think that's essential. So when I was at Concordia, there was the beginning of bioart being taught at Concordia. And after I left, Tanny Duff, a professor at Concordia, started a bioart lab out of the Milieu Institute. I don't know if it's still functioning anymore. I started the lab here at the University of Windsor. Those are the only two I know about in Canada. There's one more scientist who just left the University of Ottawa, Andrew Pelling, who did a wet bio lab for artists. There are probably 12 to 20 around the world. And I'll say that's like 400% more than there was when I started. So I definitely think it's growing. I think that, MIT's doing it. So like something is happening. And I think there will be a change over time. And if you want to know, in the background here, I have this piece. It's the back end of a piece. It's called the Great Lakes Algae Organ. It's a Dutch street organ, a life-size one that's bicycle pulled. And it has a music, but it's also an algae farm. So the back is a lab. It's an algae farm. We farm algae in there. It has light and nutrients. And then in order to mix the algae, because you have to keep it stirred, it pumps the algae out the front of the organ as I play music. It's like dun, 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 dun. And this is a strategy that I might use in a gallery or in like a festival or a fair to get people to come over and talk about algae.
That's awesome. Yeah, okay. I guess my next question is like, what are some like tools or skills that you think are going to like be important for science communication in the upcoming, in the next decade, I guess? Yeah. Both scientists and artists, like top skills or top tools for anyone that would want to get into this space. Yeah.
while we think about this, can I add something to the question? Because
yeah,
I
sorry,
feel, no, I mean, I just wanted to mention, I think, I mean, in my experience at least, there is a lot more opportunity like later on. Like I see a lot of like artists in residence, like my institute has writers in residence, artists in residence. So like, and there are beautiful art science residency, like the Gerassi, Leonardo residency. Like if you persist, I feel like there are opportunities, but yeah, it's more about putting this early on in, I guess, for students that are interested in this. I see though as a question. Do we want to stay on this or?
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead. Zoe?
Then we can get back.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking about what Jennifer was talking about, where this is a matter of funding and funds allocated for these types of collaborations. And I know that the tri-agencies are giving more funds to knowledge transfers. But from what I can tell, these knowledge transfer collaborations are usually kind of very much this hierarchical, you have the artists come in, they have to learn absolutely everything, and there is no really crosstalk between what the scientists and what the artists are doing, and rather it's kind of like an over accommodation that the artist has to do in order to be in that space and actually participate in the way that the scientist designs this collaboration to be. So I was wondering, like, how do you see the future of these strategies? Is funding of this nature interesting, promising, or in what other ways should it be changed?
I would recommend first funding, of course, but also maybe how you as an individual or how individuals can deal with this. First of all, Matteo's right. There's amazing residencies all over the world. I would definitely apply for them. But also, if you're going to enter into a collaboration with a scientist, I suggest that you interview them as you would, and in that sense, show them your best self, but also learn, like, what do they want? And is it a good fit? And if it's not a good fit, say no, thank you. One of the things that I've done over the years is I used to sort of pick scientists based on their topic because I really wanted to work on a specific thing. And then I realized that doesn't work out. What I started doing is I picked scientists I like, people who are friendly, nice, who maybe have a spouse as an artist or already have a membership at the museum. And then whatever their topic is, I can make up some wacky project about that. So I go with personal vibe first. If someone invited me to come to do science communication for their lab, I'm not rude, but I would say no, thank you, or I can put you in touch with the science communication program. One of the things I've done now at this stage in my career is I have even more control. So I work with scientists on main campus, and they often want me to come and make, or me and my students to come make posters for them and they get like $48 million and they want to spend like 10,000 on like a poster presentation at the end. And I say no, thank you. And I explain to them that what I would like to do, if they would like to work with me, that I will be involved in the grant writing and that a significant portion of the funds will be allocated towards research around how do we engage audiences with these topics. And some science communication, but also some what I would call science engagement, which is this more non-linear form of engaging with audiences.
Okay, just another note on this. That's a good idea because, yeah, maybe people from the art don't know, but a lot of grants now, scientific grants, especially public grants, like I know for sure the NIH, they have a section now that requires, like, ask the scientist, how are you going to disseminate your results? So I'm not trying to turn every art into science communication, functional art, but like most scientists like have no idea. Like they just like feel, that's the box they fill at the end without even thinking. But if you go to them and say, hey, I would like to do a project around your science, and then you maybe suggest them like, this could count as communication for you. Then you kind of solve a problem they already have. So it's, again, I think you have to find the right person. But yeah, if you're a bit more proactive, like I think they do need it. They just don't know. They don't know they need it yet. Like they don't know how to phrase it. So you have to write a grant for them. But there is, yeah. I mean, for a scientific grant, spending some money on communication, it's like such a tiny fraction of the budget. Like you could do a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that even speaks to like graduate research funding. Like, I didn't even realize until Zoe mentioned to me not after, like, while doing this event, that like this initiative can count towards a grant, the grant application for research, but it's, you know, again, a very, very small portion of that will actually help. So it sucks.
We actually have a question here in the audience, and then we have another
okay.
one on Zoom.
We're talking a lot about siloed funding and the issues with cross-disciplinarity. We're talking a lot about scientists and researchers and grants. But my question is perhaps for Danielle. You worked for Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a massive company and is the first unicorn in synthetic biology in terms of the size of it. What is the difference between doing science illustration and in the academic realm, in publications, and working with researchers in universities, and working for a company and engaging industry in science illustration? What is the difference in mentality? What is the difference in approach and in what you as an illustrator have to do in terms of either marketing or illustration of a concept?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is I was particularly within the marketing team. So I think the biggest difference is with the former that you mentioned, that the audience for that would be more like everyday people, or maybe specific people if you're trying to get somebody to get funding. Whereas working with a company, the audience for that is more of other businesses or people that you want to like have them fund the company or just keep it going. So the difference with it is very like, you have to maintain like the brand, the image, the feel of the company. You have to kind of like live and breathe it and maintain that level of professionalism.
Okay, we have another question online. This one is from Melody Mograss. And her question is, do you think that AI will be any way helpful in integrating art into science?
Yes. And of course, AI will be important. It's going to affect everything. And so I'm like cautiously optimistic about the role of AI in our practice and in many other things on the planet. We're going to see what happens. But one of the things I would say is that I think I think the digital is huge, and especially for mass dissemination and immersive experiences, it's really important. But I think also if you really want to engage audiences, you need to also have, like it's and both, you know, embodied experiences, human experiences, interspecies experiences. Like one of the things that I do is I bring people into the lab and I let them hold a biotech organism, like maybe a genetically modified something or other. And there's this moment that you can't get on the internet. And so I think it's important that it's an and both.
I mean, it's good to see an artist optimistic about AI. Yeah, I have very mixed feelings. Again, like knowing the science world, I feel like the worry of, I mean, definitely already playing a role. I don't know, depends how much you follow science, but there were a few like online debacles about like AI generated figures on scientific papers that like were completely meaningless and like past peer review somehow. But yeah, I think the worry is that of course, because most scientists, again, I don't want to speak for everybody, but they still see art as this functional thing, like just something like to illustrate a paper or like just get more clicks on social media, that AI just becomes like a quick replacement for artists, which definitely already happening. So, but I'm not against AI. I'm also, be honest, like I started using it a lot in my own work, like not in the final thing, but for idea generation, which I guess is how it was supposed to be used. But yeah, I think that's why it's even more important to educate scientists that art is not just, there are many different things, again, art can do, and like getting your clicks or making a figure quick, it's like the lowest thing that art can do. Like art can also help you think, see your search differently, engage people, and like all those things cannot be automated. So yes, you can get very nice pictures very quickly now, but the goal is not just to make nice pictures.
Yeah.
Especially in science, like these are, at least like again, the kind of things I do, like there is information there. I want them to look pretty, but there is also a lot of thinking that goes into it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, at the moment, from what I've seen, AI cannot do that.
Yeah.
Because there's no understanding behind it of the concept they're illustrating.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking how AI is definitely not there yet. I'm thinking like using AI as like a quick tool to illustrate something. Like say you're trying to do a body diagram, but AI right now will sometimes generate 6 fingers, and it's very not anatomically correct. So I definitely don't think like AI is quite there yet. And I don't think it ever will be, in the sense of replacing the need for art. I think like it can be used for a lot of things, but when it comes to replacing artists or like their creativity, I personally am kind of against it. I feel like that's just taking away something that feels so human, and is like such a way that like humans can connect with each other by doing like all these like talented and beautiful things. And I don't know if AI stealing the data or like stealing like the imagery or the past examples of people doing that and then regurgitating it in its own mush form. Like I just don't know like if it's really there, or like if we should be doing that.
Yeah.
Another thing also, besides all the like moral, ethical implication of how these models were trained without consent, but yeah, beyond that, like the pitch, what I'm trying to tell scientists is also that it's not just the end product that matters, it's like the process.
Yeah.
Like a lot of great scientists were sketching, like they were not artists, but like, I mean, okay, of course, Leonardo da Vinci, but like also Darwin and Cajal, like drawing was part of science. Even if like the final product is not beautiful, like it helps, it's a way of thinking. Like many people are talking about drawing as a way of thinking. And I think that's the part that we're gonna miss if we start using AI. It's not just the end product, it's like there's value in the process. And I'm trying to convince scientists that there is value in the process even for them, and even if they don't wanna be artists, even if I know they're in a rush and they are not good at drawing, sketching your science, as we're gonna talk tomorrow, but yeah, I think it's very valuable. And yeah, I worry about that.
I worry, but I'm also like, again, first of all, I have to say I'm like a very optimistic person. It's my coping method for life. So that's a personal failure, but I think that your argument also proves the same. So first of all, we're only seeing the very first small, tiny instances of how AI will interact with art. Okay, so if we look at like Lev Manovich, we're at the part where we're still pretending to do the last type of art with this new tool. I think what will happen is that, first of all, new things will come out of it that are not, making knockoff portraits of ourselves and all the different styles of every artist ever made. Something else will happen. Other creativity will express itself in some other form through the use of AI. But then I think the other thing that might happen, or the part where I'm optimistic, is that scientists will still sketch, because AI will be fine, and it'll be just like ubiquitous. There'll be AI images of everything everywhere all the time. And then where are we going to get our pleasure? Where are we going to get our thinking? Where are we going to get back to ourselves? Is we're going to really value these moments of doodling when someone's giving a lecture or something like that. So I'm saying the exact same thing, but trying to see it through this other lens, where maybe those activities will have more value because AI will handle all the digital imaging and posters and social media squares, and it'll free us up or make us remember how great it feels to make a mark with your hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like prioritizing the process over like the end product for sure. I just want to be mindful of the time because I do know that Jennifer has to leave in like 5 minutes. So I guess like my last question for all of you is if you have any advice for aspiring artists or scientists who might have an itch towards leaning to, either or discipline, but aren't sure where to begin. Like, I know for Matteo, he had this itch from childhood to make comics. So if you can speak about that.
Sure.
To the scientists, I just say just start drawing. Like it's gonna be good for you. That for artists, I'll leave it to you.
I would
I
say
think for artists, oh, sorry, you can go.
Sorry, I would say for both the artists and scientists, just try stuff. It's okay, make some bad art, make some bad science, don't understand, have awkward conversations. Like, I have one of my assignments, I tell my students they have to go meet a scientist. And some of them will go to the vet, some of them will go to their roommate's lab, some of them, and just go talk to each other and see what happens. Try some things.
Yeah, definitely try things and don't be afraid to not know what you're doing, because everything in life, we're all just learning as we're going, and we're all, there's just like so much to learn in life. And sometimes even if you think you know what you're doing, or you think you know like what you want to get at, as you're getting there, you'll find other things that interest you that you might branch off and go into a totally different direction. And if you see that start to happen, don't be afraid to lean into it, because that's something is drawing you that way, and keep learning and keep finding things out.
Awesome. Okay, well, that kind of concludes my questions, but are there any other? Zoe, go ahead.
We have one right back here. Thank you. We've been talking a lot about the digital and the humanizing science, these two spaces. Where do you see the role of art in facilitating in-person science events where, people can actually interact and have face-to-face, conversations with the science that can sometimes feel so far removed?
We do hands-on workshops, and we also teach scientists how to make workshops around their own work. So I think it's a great idea for scientists or for non-scientists or conferences to just create some sort of whimsical moment where everyone lets their guard down. I'll tell you a good example. If I want to get some people together and do like a difficult conversation or a hard project, I will take them all fishing for 3 days first. And once everyone's wearing hip waders and they smell bad and they're not the doctor, professor, blah, 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 then they're more likely later to have a very heartfelt conversation. And so I would recommend that if you're hosting a science conference or workshop, that art can be one way to do that. There's many other ways. Like I said, if you have, a lot of our research here is Great Lakes oriented. So we take people out on the lake for a couple of days, and it just breaks people's barriers down. One of the things I would also say is do not plan it at the last minute. I get people who call me all the time saying they're hosting a conference next week and they'd like us to do a workshop. And also you have to pay the artist, and you need to pay them whatever the scientist is getting paid to be there. That would be my advice.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of this interaction with art and science with Matteo tomorrow morning. For anyone who's interested in attending.
Yes, I was just about to say.
I haven't done many in-person exhibitions, but I do, workshops like the one of tomorrow. And I don't know if I have any advice, I guess. I think, unfortunately, it's kind of like self-selected, right? Like the scientists that show up are already predisposed and interested in this. So I guess, the only other way would be to as we were saying, maybe put them at conferences, do them at events or places where scientists already are, because as we know, they're very busy. They don't have much time or room to go and look for art. So to really put them in front. Actually, a good model for that, actually it's different, but Guerrilla Science was a very interesting group that was doing science events, performances at music festivals or other festivals. So taking the science somewhere completely different, but do the other way. the other way around, like bring art in spaces where scientists are, and they don't expect it, or they're not looking. Bye.
Thank you, Jennifer, for
Really
joining
nice to meet
us.
you all. Have a good day.
You too. Awesome.
I guess actually that's kind of my area of expertise is like doing more of like those installation or in-person things that like portray science. So I guess like the one example is my personal work, like the Bye Bye Birdies thing that I was talking about earlier, and how that represents data. And I guess also to like talk about that briefly, like the way that I do that is like I take the data and it shows how vulnerable bird species will be in the face of climate change. So I physically make these like wooden laser cut embroidered birds and make them true to size and as accurate as possible. And then I'll put them on the wall based on how their level of threat. So like the closer to the ground they are, the more likely they'll be extinct, and the higher up they are, then the safer they'll be. And I think like showcasing data in a different way like that, like when I've put it up like 2 times, like I saw that people like can read it and understand it better than like if they just like scanned the data cold turkey. But like they also tend to make things personal, and I think that was like my favorite thing, is seeing the way that people will, instead of being all sad about like, oh, like there's a lot of birds that are threatened, like they actually are like, oh, I know that bird, it's building a nest in my backyard right now. And I think it's really lovely to see people make like human connections and like personalizations to things. And then that kind of ties into now, like you're mentioning conferences and stuff. So at Ginkgo, I had the opportunity to, like me and my coworker, we designed the booth for SynBio Beta this past couple months ago. And we wanted to break all traditional norms of how conference booths are. The way that we look at it, conference booths are very business centered. So usually like there'll be like the people at the booth and they're trying to pull you in and sell you a product or give you merch or whatever, and then you never talk to them for the rest of the conference. So what we wanted to do was make it an inviting place. We know that people can feel as though like conferences can drag. We wanted some like people to like come back to it several times, feel comfortable, and not feel obligated to talk to anyone at Ginkgo. So what we ended up doing was we just made it as like cozy as possible, and we had different sections based on human behaviors. So we had like a bunch of standing tables for people who did not want to feel tethered to the booth if they had to like sit. And at those standing tables, we had like a puzzle making station, and then we also had like bracelet making stations. So like people were making like all these like little friendship bracelets talking about like the topics that they liked. And it really worked because people would just talk to each other about what they're writing out in their bracelet. And it was a great way to like have conversation starters. And so I guess, yeah, to like wrap that all up is basically, that's what I personally love, is like changing the norms of like how we like present things in person. And I think there is a ton of ways that we can go about that. And as long as we like reach out to like people and like their emotions more than like the, I don't know, business side of things, then it can get fun.
Yeah, I feel like people care more when there's like a personal connection with, you know, the work. And if anyone wants to see, I was looking at your website of that booth, and I was like, oh my God, I would have gone to that just to go to that booth, because it looked so fun. There was like puzzles, and like you even made like buttons that people would wear to like, oh, like I don't even know, like microbiology or something, or I love DNA, and that
yeah,
kind
it
of
was
sparks.
basically like buttons that like showed things that people are interested in, and we made it like a little scavenger hunt where we like hid them in books, because we also had a little library section too. So if you wanted to completely not talk to people, you can go look at the library, see some of the books that us from the creative team were reading, and they were all like SynBio focused and
Yeah.
the Grow magazines and stuff like that. And then then there were these fake books with the buttons that then people can take a button and show, and then you see. And it's like more ways of just like having conversation starters.
Yeah, I want to see that in like research conferences, honestly, instead of just having a poster and standing in front of it. Okay, well, is there anything else? No? Okay, so are there any other questions online or no? Zoe, one last one to wrap things up?
Thank you.
Yeah, as a scientist, I mean, we've also talked a lot about the hierarchies and this like binary way of looking at art and science, where one is like the right brain and the other is the left brain, and they never ever connect. But in my practice and how I see my art friends manage the way that they think, I can see a lot of similarities between our creative processes. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how you found, these similarities between a creative process in science and in arts.
You mentioned the left brain and right brain. Yeah, that's one of the myths I'm constantly fighting against. Yeah, I mean, as you say, there are definitely similarities, and I think I don't want to get back to, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it goes back to this idea of like educating ourselves that it's not just about the product, it's about the process. So it's not about art versus science, about more holistic, like more it's like more focused analytical thinking and a more holistic mode where we make connection. And it's literally the same. Like in my art, again, to make a parallelism to science, like there are very different phases. Like there is the more idea generation phase where it's very non-verbal and I'm sketching, and I usually like to do it like first thing in the morning when I'm fresh. And then there is the more like, I don't want to say boring, but the more like very linear phase where I just have to like fill in the lines and color everything. And that's literally like doing a science experiment protocol, like following a protocol. So it is really not that different. I think it's more about appreciating there are different things, both in science and art, but different modalities. So, and unfortunately, we are not trained in them. Like science is becoming more and more like industrialized. Like you have to do more and more and more experiments. We are really not trained about how do you come up with ideas? Like how do you what is a theory? Like how do you connect all the data we're generating? And maybe artists are much more trained in that and less in the analytical part, but I don't know. I think we both need to learn more about both.
I'm shaking my head to what you said about maybe art is more trained in like how do you come up with ideas? Definitely not. Like I think it also is just like ideas just come to people differently, and so I don't know. There's no technique. It's just whatever. You wake up, you have a dream, you get inspired by something, whatever it might be. But to answer what Zoe was asking, I think like thinking left and right brain, I think my brain's just one big pile. I think when it comes to like art or science, like I approach them kind of in the same way. Like in my lab experience, like I approached it artistically, and maybe that's just because I didn't have too much of a science background to have all those science questions, but I more so viewed it as like, this is a life form, and like, how can we collaborate? How can I make it happy? Like, and if it started growing mold, like I would care about the mold, and then I'm like, okay, like how can I like discard this properly or something? So I guess like for me, like everything's kind of like in a more like natural type of viewpoint. But then even like when I make art, sometimes I realize like it's also in like a very like traditional scientific method of making art. Like sometimes I'll like come up with the idea or the hypothesis, and then I try to like sketch it and like see if it's like going in the right direction. And I'm losing my thought, but basically it's kind of like what it is like I'll like test things a bunch of times, and then like if it's not, and like I'll like make notes on like, oh, this is the perfect setting, this is like the approach that I have to do, this is the right color, and it feels like looking at my notes like side by side from like my few lab experiences versus like my art notes, like they're kind of the same thing. Like you wouldn't know if it was art or science. But
we have another question back here.
And I have a quick question towards the end of this session. I know, Matteo, we're going to be back tomorrow for your workshop, and I'm just quick ask about what you're planning to be doing so that those of us who are itching to get hands-on in practice maybe can participate.
A trailer, yeah. So I mean, usually I start with a lot of theory. Like I'm going to talk more about some of the things we touched on today. So visual thinking and storytelling and why these things are important. And and then I'm going to start with some exercises. And actually, the first exercise is not mine, is like from this famous comic scholar, Nick Susanis. But I think it works very well with scientists because it doesn't ask you to draw things. It's really about trying to like, the prompt is like draw your day, and using only boxes, like dividing a sheet of paper into boxes and then filling with lines or marks, like completely abstract. And I find it's very similar to like almost an infographic. And the goal is really to like take off the pressure. Like I'm not trying to turn everybody into an artist. Like I don't expect scientists to do beautiful drawings. It's really much more about organizing information visually and spatially. So that's what I'm trying to get to. Move away from like the pretty image and more about the process, which I think is what's more valuable for scientists. So again, this idea of thinking through drawing.
Yeah, just to reiterate, so tomorrow, Matteo will be joining us at Fourth Space in person, but it'll also be broadcasted online. We will have materials, but if you do have like a tablet or something to draw with, that would be great. Yeah, other than that, thank you so much for joining me on this panel. The next event of a part of SynBio Expressions for today is at 1:30, and it's called SynBio Conversations. Zoe and a bunch of other people will be interviewing different grad students or interesting people that are doing synthetic biology in Montreal. So please join us in person for that. Refreshments will be provided. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you to Kathleen, to Zoe, and to Orly for bringing in our fascinating panelists today and activating this wonderful conversation about science and art at Force-Space. To everyone online and those of you here in the space, thank you for your questions and your contributions. We're going to be closing up the live stream now, but a quick reminder that this conversation is already available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share it. So as Kathleen mentioned, join us again this afternoon at 1:30 for our next event in the SynBio Expressions Conference. Thanks, everybody, and have a great morning.